A millionaire took his housekeeper to a business dinner. Her actions shocked everyone. Welcome to Wise Stories. Please do remember to subscribe, like and share this video. Jonathan Blake paced back and forth in his sprawling, minimalist living room. The large windows framed a view of the city skyline, but his focus was on the phone in his hand. His date for the evening had just cancelled. A high-profile business dinner with potential investors loomed, and appearances were everything. Jonathan needed someone to accompany him. Fast. Running a hand through his neatly styled hair, he muttered, "I can't show up alone. Not tonight." In that moment, the sound of a vacuum cleaner hummed from the hallway. Jonathan turned toward the sound and saw Maria Lopez, his housekeeper, diligently cleaning as usual. She was kind and dependable, though he had never considered speaking to her beyond professional exchanges. Desperation made him hesitate before clearing his throat. "Maria?" Startled, Maria switched off the vacuum and looked up. Her warm brown eyes met his, a hint of curiosity on her face. "Yes, Mr. Blake? I need to ask something unusual." He gestured toward the kitchen, inviting her to join him. She followed, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. "There's a business dinner tonight," Jonathan began, struggling to find the right words. "My guest canceled at the last minute. I was wondering if you would, well, if you'd come with me." Maria blinked, stunned. "Me? To a business dinner?" "Yes." He exhaled, as if trying to explain further would only complicate things. "It's important for me to have someone there." For a moment, Maria stood in silence, processing the unexpected request. "Mr. Blake, I appreciate the offer, but I'm just your housekeeper. What would I even say to those people?" Jonathan softened his tone, sensing her hesitation. "You're more than just a housekeeper, Maria. You're thoughtful and articulate. I trust you'll make a good impression." She bit her lip, unsure. "I don't have fancy clothes for something like that." "That's not a problem," Jonathan assured her. "Come as you are. Be yourself." Maria hesitated a little longer before offering a small smile. "If you're sure, then, okay. I'll go." "Good." Jonathan nodded, relieved. "We leave at 7. By the time the clock struck 7, Jonathan waited by the door, his black suit perfectly tailored. The sound of heels clicking against the hardwood floor made him turn around. His breath caught as Maria appeared. She wore a traditional Mexican dress, elegant yet simple, with vibrant embroidery of red and gold flowers cascading down the fabric. Her hair was neatly pinned back, with a single flower tucked behind her ear. Despite her modest attire, there was a quiet confidence in her step. "Maria," Jonathan said, genuinely surprised, "you look wonderful." She smiled shyly. "I hope it's okay. This is the best I had." "It's more than okay," he replied. "It suits you perfectly." As they stepped into the sleek black car waiting outside, Maria clasped her hands nervously on her lap. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Blake?" "Call me Jonathan tonight," he said simply. "And yes, I'm sure." Maria glanced out the window as the city lights blurred past them. "I never imagined I'd be going to one of these fancy dinners," she admitted softly. "My father used to say our family would always be humble folk." "There's nothing wrong with being humble," Jonathan responded. "But tonight, just be yourself. That's what matters." Maria took a steadying breath and nodded. "All right, Jonathan. Let's do this." The car glided through the city streets toward a night neither of them would forget. The grand dining hall shimmered with gold accents and crystal chandeliers. Wealthy elites in designer suits and evening gowns mingled over glasses of champagne. Conversations floated through the air, filled with business jargon and polite laughter. Jonathan entered with Maria by his side. Heads turned immediately and whispers spread like wildfire. Maria, dressed in her modest traditional attire, stood out among the extravagant gowns. Her nervous smile faltered as judgmental eyes swept over her. "Is that the housekeeper?" someone muttered under their breath. "Jonathan must be desperate," another whispered, followed by a condescending laugh. Maria kept her composure, though her fingers clenched slightly around the embroidered fabric of her dress. Jonathan leaned closer and whispered, "Ignore them. They'll change their minds soon enough." Taking a steady breath, Maria nodded. "I'll be fine." They moved to a circle of guests, where Edward Grant, Jonathan's business rival, stood front and center. His sharp eyes narrowed at Maria, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Jonathan," Edward greeted smoothly, "interesting choice of company tonight." Jonathan's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Maria spoke up, her voice calm. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Grant. I've heard you're quite the businessman." Edward chuckled, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "And you are." Maria Lopez. She extended her hand confidently. Housekeeper by day, curious observer of business by night. The surrounding guests chuckled, though some inched closer, intrigued by her confidence. I didn't realize the service staff were part of these dinners now, Edward quipped, earning a few polite laughs. Maria smiled serenely. Well, it's always good to have someone here who knows how to clean up a mess, whether it's on the table or in conversation. Laughter erupted from the crowd, and Edward's face darkened. Jonathan fought back a grin. Shall we find our seats? By the time the evening progressed, Maria's charm and thoughtful insights about hard work and perseverance had won over many guests, silencing the initial ridicule. Even Edward remained unusually quiet, nursing his bruised ego in silence. The dinner was well underway, and the clinking of silverware filled the room as conversations hummed around the grand table. Maria sat beside Jonathan and directly across from Isabel Kingston, a renowned investor with a sharp eye for talent. Isabel had been polite but distant, clearly uncertain about Maria's place at such an event. As dessert was served, the conversation turned to the challenges of maintaining a successful business. Isabel shared a story about a company she had recently saved from bankruptcy. It takes resilience, she said, her eyes scanning the table. Not everyone is built for it. Maria spoke up softly, her voice steady but thoughtful. I understand that well. My father ran a small shop when I was growing up. It wasn't easy for him either. Isabel's brows lifted slightly. A family business? Yes. Maria nodded. He sold handcrafted furniture. Every piece was made with care, but competing against mass-produced items was hard. There were weeks we barely made enough to keep the lights on. Her voice carried a mix of pride and sadness. Still, he never compromised on quality. He believed good work speaks for itself. Jonathan glanced at Maria, surprised by her openness. And did it work out for him? Isabel asked, intrigued. Maria smiled faintly. Eventually, yes. It took years, but his reputation grew. Customers came back because they trusted him. He taught me that patience and integrity are just as important as profit margins. Isabel leaned forward, clearly impressed. That's a rare perspective these days. Maria shrugged modestly. It's just what I know. Jonathan observed the exchange, a newfound appreciation for Maria growing inside him. He had always seen her as dependable, but now her depth and wisdom were undeniable. Jonathan, Isabel said, turning to him with a smile, you brought someone to this dinner who understands business better than most CEOs I know. Maria chuckled softly. Just a housekeeper with a few stories, Miss Kingston. An insightful one, Isabel corrected. I see potential in you. Jonathan couldn't help but agree. So do I. As the evening progressed, conversations turned more competitive. Jonathan presented his business proposal for an innovative tech platform designed to streamline supply chain management for small businesses. The guests listened attentively, though Edward Grant, ever the opportunist, waited for a chance to interject. Interesting concept, Jonathan, Edward drawled, leaning back in his chair. But isn't it risky? Small businesses aren't exactly known for their loyalty to long-term partnerships. They jump ship for the next cheaper option. Your platform might just be a sinking investment. A few murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. Jonathan's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Maria spoke up. With all due respect, Mr. Grant, she began calmly, I think you're underestimating small businesses and the people behind them. Edward raised an eyebrow. And what makes you an expert, Miss Lopez? Maria held his gaze without flinching. My father ran a small business. He built trust with his customers by offering quality and consistency. Those relationships weren't based on price alone. They were built on loyalty and reliability. If Jonathan's platform can help small businesses do that more efficiently, I don't see it as a risk. I see it as a solution to help them thrive. The room fell silent for a moment. Isabel Kingston tapped her fingers thoughtfully against her glass. That's a solid point, she said. Small businesses are often overlooked, but loyalty is one of their strongest assets. Jonathan seized the moment. Exactly. Our platform won't just be about saving costs. It will help small businesses build stronger networks, streamline operations, and ultimately create more value for their customers. Edward attempted to recover. That sounds idealistic, but scaling that loyalty is a challenge. Maria smiled. Maybe for someone who doesn't understand it. Laughter rippled through the guests, and Edward's confident smirk faltered. Isabel turned to Jonathan. I think your platform has real potential, especially with this perspective. You've got my attention. The other guests nodded in agreement, shifting their support firmly toward Jonathan. Edward sat in silence, clearly defeated. As the dinner concluded, Jonathan leaned toward Maria and whispered, "Thank you. You turned the whole room around." Maria smiled modestly. "Just calling it like I see it." "You did more than that," he replied, "and I owe you one." As the dinner drew to a close, the room buzzed with conversations about Jonathan's proposal and Maria's unexpected contributions. Isabel Kingston, now visibly impressed, approached Jonathan and Maria with a warm smile. "Maria," Isabel said, "your insights tonight were invaluable. You clearly understand business and people in a way most professionals miss." Maria smiled modestly. "I just spoke from experience, Miss Kingston." "Well," Isabel chuckled, "experience like yours is rare. Jonathan, I hope you realize the asset you have right here." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "I do now. Maria, would you consider joining my team as a consultant? I think your perspective could help us connect with small businesses better than we ever have." Maria blinked in surprise. "Me? A consultant? But I'm just more than a housekeeper," Jonathan interrupted gently. "You've proven that tonight. Your voice is exactly what this company needs." After a moment of silence, Maria smiled. "If you think I can help, then I'm willing to try." Jonathan extended his hand and Maria shook it firmly. "Welcome to the team," he said. That as the guests began to leave, Jonathan and Maria stood side by side, watching the city lights sparkle through the tall windows. "Tonight changed a lot," Jonathan mused. "It did," Maria agreed. Jonathan glanced at her, a newfound respect in his eyes. "Thanks for reminding me what really matters." Maria smiled softly. "Sometimes all it takes is being true to yourself."